Thank you. It's great to be here. I have the real privilege of getting to have my foot in both camps, so to speak, at both Challenger Gray and Christmas as director of the coaching practice there, the business and executive coaching, and I also spend a great deal of time at DePaul University. So I live in both communities. The other thing I'm going to tell you is that I'm not going to lecture you. I don't think that that's probably, you hear enough of that. I don't believe that that's the way we learn. I think that we learn through stories. I think that we learn the most from each other and our experiences. And I believe that in this room, this needs to be a safe place where we can tell those stories and we can talk and we can exchange ideas about the way things really are and what we need to do. I want to speak first to the difference between, or the lack of difference between, what we think of as corporate America and the university. On the transition side of our business that you may know better, the Challenger Gray and Christmas piece, we speak with people that are in transition from corporation through mergers and acquisitions, all kinds of reasons. And one of the things we often hear from people coming out of private organizations or corporations when we sit with them is they say, I can tell you one thing I know for certain, and that is I don't want to deal with corporate politics anymore. So I know what I want to do now. What's that? I want to be at a university. And my answer to that is always, they're smarter and they have more time. So we know that it's true. It's life. People are people. It doesn't matter whether we're universities, whether we're making automotive parts, or what we're doing. People are people, and our interactions are that way. I'll tell you another story, and I'll explain very briefly something in our coaching practice, and that is, I believe personally and in practice very much that everybody deserves a chance to change and develop. And that doesn't matter who you are, when we're talking about diversity or whatever. Everyone deserves that chance. I particularly believe that in the work that we did with establishing the high school for ex-offenders. But having said that, not everybody will. So in the coaching practice, the first 30 days of the intensive coaching is the most important in deciding if the person who's being coached is really ready, willing, able to make those changes and move ahead. And if they're not, we will go back and there'll be another conversation, and we will not waste the organization's time and money, that person's time. We'll look at where they need to be, or the coach's time in doing that. And that happens in less than 4% of the cases that we see, and we deal with hundreds of people a year, and we're very proud of that. And it really came to a test in that less than 4% of the cases about 5 years ago, when one of the times that I had to sit with someone and say, we're walking away from this case, we can't make this change, and this was at DePaul University. That's the school where I'm involved, but that's how strongly we feel about that, and that's how those kind of things need to be dealt with sometimes. So it's truth-telling, and that's good for everybody. This is just an idea, and just to see and keep in the back of your minds as you look through here, and without a lot of real definition or things, you may recognize people, if you close your eyes, that somewhere in the time or in your career, you may have seen a screaming Mimi. Anybody ever think of anyone? Can you think of anyone that was in your past or your present that was a screaming Mimi? I had a lesson taught to me very early in my career that was very, very good. And had a young man, I was working in operations and had a group in a pharmaceutical company. And he worked part-time for me, and he was also a very talented graphic designer. And for my birthday one year, the people that worked for me decorated my office. And he made a very nice hanging sculpture with holograms that would twirl around. And I thought, isn't that lovely? Until I realized when those holograms would stop, they had a finger pointing like this, and they said, listen to what I'm saying to you. And it was good that that happened early. So I can see someone there. And that someone became myself. Title here, that didn't get done. You can tell I'm not a PowerPoint person. But you're not allowed to go and speak without them, I don't think. I was in New York. We do some work with a large internet music company. That the real challenge there is the average employee age is 25 and a half years old in management. And the average employee's been there a year and a half. So it really is a challenge. And I asked for one of the employees there, and working with the group, I said, could I please have just an easel with a flip chart? And he said, what is that? And what I think with PowerPoint is if there's lots and lots on those slides, there's no reason for me to be here, and you wouldn't be listening to me. It's the same way I don't hand out handouts in class until the class is over, because it's only human nature. If you had a handout, what would you be doing? Right. One of the terms that's being used more often, and there's more attention to bullying now, and it's starting, we hear a lot about bullying in schools. And this is a wonderful thing in elementary schools, junior high, high schools, because just like all sorts of abuse and violence, it's handed down like the family silver and in groups. But we don't really want to necessarily talk about it at an adult level or a professional level. And so a lot of the titles that are being used now, people are talking about escalated incivility. And is it really just escalated incivility? Or is it more than that? What is it? You know, it's difficult for us to really think about people that we know or that we're around or that we tolerate that they might be a bully. When I first began doing work and research on bullying and working with coaching and things, and would go into organizations, and if we're talking about a problem employee, and they would describe her or describe him, and I would listen and hear all the things that were going on and all the problems that they wanted solved, and I would say, well, would you say that she's a bully? And people say, oh, no, we can't say that. Really? What would you like to say? How would you like to do this? How would you like to have those critical conversations, and how would you like this to change? It was interesting in the beginning remarks when you're talking about John Cotter and his book, Leading Change, and he's one of my favorite authors too. And one of his things that I think all of us need to remember is never underestimate the resistors to change, no matter how few they are. Any of you recognize that kind of situation? Never underestimate the resistors to change, no matter how few they are. And it's wonderful when we're in groups like this and in sessions like this to say, there is no reason that we can't do this. And that's easy to say in this room. Is that necessarily automatically going to happen or be that easy with everybody that's not in this room today or listening to do this? It really is action. It's going to take that kind of action verb and to really talk about things. Is it an epidemic? What do you think? How many hands do you think that bullying is a pervasive problem in the United States? Great. Another thing I want to mention too as we go along is you don't have to wait to ask questions, because sometimes there's something that I'll say that triggers an idea, a story, or a question. Don't wait until I'm through telling you everything that I know in the world to ask that question or to share that, because we might lose something along the way, okay? And if I get really tired of talking, I'll start asking you questions. So if you don't want to be on the spot, speak up. Let's make this a conversation. Is that a deal? Okay. It is an epidemic, and I'll mention two surveys. There are a lot of other surveys to support them that really, really are one of those things that make things go bump in the night for me. And one is, as you've noticed and Ron said, that I have had interest over the years in domestic violence. I worked on boards, and I actually full-time for a year and a half worked on writing grants to have children's programs in battered women's shelters, because it is handed down like the family silver. Dad hits mom, mom hits the kids, or in some order like that. And the only place I believe that you can break into that cycle is in the beginning and really move forward. That was 15 years ago. And anybody, take a guess, Ron, what percentage of domestic violence programs do you think have programs for children to address it at that level?
10%.
What do you think?
40.
Three. It's really frightening. All of the FBI surveys that have been done over the last 10 years, there's been in partnerships, whether they're married, unmarried, men, women, or whatever, at least one incidence of abuse in 1 out of every 2 relationships in the United States. It's frightening, isn't it? When we talk to people and there are surveys done, and I want you to think, and when you said is bullying epidemic, and a lot of you raised your hands, and just to think back, and then I'll talk a little bit about the percentage too. How many of you can remember in your working life or your school life having been bullied, hearing someone be bullied, or seeing someone be bullied? How many? Okay, we're sitting here in a professional community, and it's overwhelming, the number. The numbers are somewhere close to 84 to 90%. When was the last time you heard anyone talk about bullying in the workplace? Or calling it that? It's one of those things, you know what, there are 2 things that are really hard for us to talk about most times, and one is money, second one is sex, and both of those are easier, and you all would be more forthcoming telling me stories than you will be about bullying. True? It's one of the hidden, unspoken secrets that we'll call anything else. Why is it ignored? Why do you think that? And I'll talk about a couple reasons, but Ron, why would you think it's ignored in the workplace? Let's put you on the spot. No one's talking. I told you I was going to do it. You didn't listen.
People just want to believe it doesn't happen.
Right. Anyone else?
Job security.
Yeah. Do you think that it may have been a little more prevalent in the years 2008 through 2012 during the recession? That was the bully's playground. And believe me, there were not a lot of organizations calling me up and willing to spend money to address it. And back here, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think people don't want to be the victim. You don't want to be, you don't want the attention of it.
Right. You know, if you're exposing something to the EPA, you're called a whistleblower, and someone might eventually make a documentary movie about you. Right? And you might be a hero. And how many people do you think that expose a bully anywhere that they're working or try to protect someone are admired as a whistleblower and might ever have a documentary movie? I think I'll do that and I'll be promoted. How do you think that's going to work for you? That it really is. One reason that it hasn't been, and it's not addressed in many places and can be difficult, and any of you who work around human resources too know, that what we do know is that in the vast majority of cases, bullying is same-sex. When bullying is opposite sex, it can be addressed and is often addressed, and you can go to human resources, it can be addressed under harassment policies. and in opposite gender. In same gender bullying, it's very, very, very difficult to have it addressed. I would like to tell you that there are many, many, many fewer female bullies than there are males. Does anyone agree with that statement? It's equal opportunity. It's one of the few places we finally really made it with equal opportunity. And that's a sad, sad statement. In the executive suite, there are more male bullies than there are female bullies, and that's simply because there are more males. So I'm going to put in a plug here. Over the last couple years, and where I come from in operations and pharmaceuticals and those sort of things, there are certainly historically many more males. So my campaign over the last few years have been that I want people to stop talking about male-dominated industry, and ladies, we're going to start calling it male-saturated industries from now on, and do it and look at it that way. And the problem is, and because there are fewer women who have made it to that level, and if it's a woman who's a bully at a C-suite or executive level in a company, what often happens to other women, if they complain about that behavior, is they're not viewed as a victim, but rather they're told, Suzanne, maybe you better toughen up. Look at how much Judith has done. Do you think that she got there by whining and complaining? You need to toughen up. You need to be more like that. Anybody ever seen behavior like that? Anyone ever been around a woman like that? Surely not at a university. No. Then there's another problem, and in universities you don't turn profits, although you have to do that more and more, don't you now? And talk about that, but certainly in corporations always. The rainmakers, and we see this in people in high-level business development and sales. We do a lot of work with very large professional service firms and law firms. You would never see this with attorneys, would you? Never heard of this, have you? No. I sat with an attorney not long ago, and he said, you know, one of the problems is everybody talks about, and they think that physicians think about themselves as God. And I said, yeah, I've run into that. He said, but that's not the truth. They're just mechanics. Attorneys are the ones that are really God. And so you have those people who are rainmakers, and they bring the business into corporations, and they bring the ideas in. They have the new things, the new innovations, the things that have raised their organization, their company, their university, dare I say that, or something head and shoulders above the rest, and they're the rainmakers or the brilliant, you know what, and say, you know, Bill is just, he's terrible when he's in here. But you know he's brilliant. That's just the way Bill is. Often it's people who are out facing the public, and in facing the public, they do terrific work for an organization, and they bring things back. But inside the organization, they're not. And they're allowed to get away with it. And they've been allowed to get away with it for a long time. And until we get to the place, and there is writing now finally about don't employ jerks, and people that are allowed to get away with that, sat with a woman who it was finally had gotten so bad and with complaints that they were addressing her bullying behavior. She said, I don't see what the problem is here. I don't understand why I have to do this. I don't get it. I said, well, let me help you get it a little bit. Perhaps it's when you come back in and the women who are working in the organization, the association, that you say it's no wonder that you can't get your work done and it takes you so long and you're so slow because look how fat you all are. And you dress like you're going to a bowling alley. She said, well, it's the truth. I said, well, we need to talk about this. And she said, I still don't see the problem. They know I'm a bitch. I tell them that. They know it. So it's therefore, I behave poorly, and if I tell you that, it's okay. Have you worked around someone who was like that? That's just the way I am. Legislation. Since 2003, and when people began to talk a little bit about this, and when really it began talking openly about it, especially in the UK, there's been legislation, drafted anti-bullying legislation in 23 states in the United States. How many states do you think it has actually passed both House and Senate and is now in effect? Any guesses? How many do you think? 0. You're right. That's the correct answer. 0. 0. It's not a priority. Like other abuse, if it's reported, you're sent back to live with your attacker and work with your attacker. If we're attacked by a stranger on the street and there's a problem and we complain, they're kept away from us. Is that not true? That's not true with people who are mistreated in the workplace or at home, is it? So this is really something, and this is also really a reason that I'm heartened by the discussion and the talk now about bullying in schools and bullying with children, because all of these legislators do have children and can begin to realize that this is a problem that needs to be talked with openly. So when there is bullying in the workplace, who suffers? Everyone. There's everyone around. And you have in your folder, and you might want to read it later, there are 2 articles that I really like. One's called Working with Toxic Leaders. The other one talks about how bullying erodes competitive advantage in the workplace. And so that we can finally, not just because we want to be altruistic or we want to be good or do the right thing, and that should be good reason for addressing this, but it often is not being addressed till we can make a business case. And going into an organization and showing that by the shutdown, by losing good workers, by losing good teachers, by losing people and workers shutting down, that you're really losing competitive advantage and you're losing money, that this is a compelling reason to address this problem, and that finally it's being addressed. It's too bad that that's what it takes, but it's being addressed, and sometimes that's what it takes, is to really talk about what's happening and who's being hurt. Productivity, if you think about it, one of the problems with bullying is, and if you've worked for a bully, let me see again, how many of you have ever worked for a bully? Then you know how it feels that you never know what day the target's going to be on your back. Is that true? And sometimes it's even good he's gone after Rich today. Maybe he'll leave me alone. I'll just stay over here, and I'm going to be quiet, and I'm not going to do anything. The less I do, the less chance there is that I'll be attacked. True? And if I complain, he or she is really going to get revved up, and then we're all going to suffer. When you've worked for a dictator, a commander, or that sort of person, have you ever heard someone say to someone else, shh, shh, don't do that. You're really going to get her started again. Does that sound familiar? Let's all sit in this meeting and be quiet. If I'm in a place, in a university, in a company or whatever, and I see a meeting going on, and the only person in that meeting that's talking is the leader, it's not because that leader is brilliant. And it's not because the people in that group are dull. And it's not because those people don't have ideas. None of those ideas ever get shared, do they? And that's the other place and the other way that your organization or any organization suffers, is because there's only one idea. And there's only one right answer, and those other answers or ideas never get heard.
Question for you. How do you see, it seems like there's a real dichotomy culturally, if you watch television shows, if you talk about, if you know, the rhetoric in politics, everything is so strident, nobody's afraid to say anything. There's anonymity, so everybody is really bold and is really, there's a lot of bullying going on the internet. We're having this conversation about what do we do on the ground and how do we protect our children in classrooms, and how do we make it a better workplace for us here. But it seems like there's such a split there that in terms of some of the things you're talking about where you tell people, shh, don't say anything. You know, we're getting that reinforced every day after you leave the workplace and you go home and you're exposed to culture that's sort of reinforcing that message for you. How do you see us dealing with that as we have this conversation?
It does. It absolutely does. And one of the things, and with our culture and with what we do, and one of the shifts that has to be there are what's tolerated and what's allowed as a leader and what's admired as a leader. And you know, we're in a country where we talk about people and look up to them as giants in business, and they have nicknames like Chainsaw Al. True? Brilliant, 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 brilliant man, Steve Jobs, that it was almost impossible to get people to work for him or continue to work for him. But do we ever, when in his biography, which is wonderful and is worth reading, and it tells a lot of truth and a lot of things about that, how much of that piece of that story do you ever hear? Very little, right? And as long as we have leaders like that and jerks are employed, and that's to be admired, it's going to continue to be a problem. There has to be a shift there. That tough guy, that tough woman, the devil wears Prada.
I just want to say, you know, we live in a state that, in my opinion, we have state-sanctioned bullying because our Elliott Larson law does not cover LGBT people in our state. And I have found, on an outsider, I'm not here at the university, but it's easy to say it doesn't affect me, but when you're talking about who's suffering, the whole state of Michigan is suffering because we are developing a reputation of an intolerant state. And when you have a law in the book that bullies people, if you're going to lose your job and denied housing, and my whole position is we want to protect students, K-12, we want to protect university students, but the goal is to grow up. And when you grow up and you live in our state and you're not protected, to me it's unacceptable, and we need more people standing up for that.
Absolutely. And states do get reputations. I live in the state of Illinois, where I think our reputation is about to be that we have a memorial governor's prisoner cell, that they take turns. Or the city of Chicago. And it's going to be interesting to see now, after Chicagoland has been on CNN, how we're viewed. But it's interesting when I travel and I say I live in Chicago and I love it, it's a wonderful city, and people look at me like you've lost your mind because of what they know about that. But I think that's true, and as I said, I think it's wonderful that we're dealing with this and with the school-age kids and things, but that also has to go up. And can you say, we're going to protect one group and not another? As you said earlier, what is diversity? Who's different? As long as anyone is excluded from being protected, is there real protection under the law? Or is there real protection under practice? It's okay, we can't talk about this group that way, but we can talk about women. That it has to be, it's for everyone. In this case, one size fits all. It gets, we do a lot of work with coaching high potential people, and people that have been named on succession plans. Have any of you been involved in succession planning anywhere you've been? Yeah. And you know that it can be a very, very long, arduous, and expensive exercise. But in the end, if nothing's ever done to develop people that are named on that succession plan, it's like a mission statement. It's nothing but a piece of paper, only words on the chart. And so we'll get calls and say, I want you, we've done succession planning, and I want you to come in and I want you to help coach some high potential people, and say, great, that's one of our favorite things to do. That's a lot more fun than coaching bullies. But they'll say, and I'll say, and how are we going to address this? Who are we going to coach? And they'll say, well, we think it's most important. We've been talking it over. And we think that the people that need coached first are our diversity candidates. Really? Yeah, no, we think that's really the good idea. Why do you think that that's so? Well, they're probably going to have more problems, and so we want to give them that extra boost up. But the thing again, and like you'll hear it when people are talking about microaggression, they have no idea what was wrong with that statement. They really do believe that this is a wonderful thing that this company is going to do. Women's leadership networks, and there's one women's leadership network that I really, really enjoy working with, and they're developing women within a very, very technical industry, and they really believe in what they're saying, and they put their money where their mouth is about what they want to happen for everybody. And in doing that, but that can also be the exception to the rule. These women need help. Doing what? Getting over being women? What are the goals? What are we talking about here? What do we really want people to do? Let's talk a little bit and look at these kinds of people that you've seen and think back, think about now. You can call these people any names you want to. You don't have to tell their real names or whatever, but I just like you to look at each of these and think if you've ever known, seen, or heard of anyone like this, and tell me about it. The first kind that's often seen are conquerors, and their thing is all about power, all about control, and all about controlling their own turf and not giving it up. Anybody know any, ever seen anyone like that? Have you? Tell us about it.
The experience that I've had, I've been able to actually work with someone that does not, oh, thank you. I've actually had the experience of working with someone that it's me, it's never us or we. When it comes to sharing opportunities and sharing experiences, that does not happen either. It's simply me, my, and I.
Anyone else know a conqueror?
I have to admit, I think I am a little bit of a conqueror. Power, self-control, turf holding. I'm a woman in my 50s, and I actually received training about using requisite force so that when someone challenged me and I felt that I had a valid argument, to use that requisite force to stand your ground. And I've become pretty adept at it. And I think that, you know, if we're being honest, there's parts of things that we hate about bullying because they're characteristics that we all possess. So if I'm being honest, I think that the conqueror part has served me more often than it hasn't. So maybe there's a bit of also reward for, you know, exhibiting some of that characteristic.
And I have too. Yeah, like listen to what I'm saying to you. But they, and it serves us well when we're doing the conquering, when we're doing the command and control. But does it serve other people around us? Another thing with the turf holding and that we see, and dare I say, we're seeing it a lot with boomers and those of us that are getting to that place that we're not going to be the conquerors necessarily anymore, and that is knowledge hoarding. Knowledge hoarding and is one of the most terrible waste of mind and experience and things that we see over and over and over. And it's really, why do people hoard knowledge? Turf protection. I can remember in a client service group that I'd gone in and to do consulting, and they worked, it was in testing and assessment, and they had a large retail client. It's been long enough ago now, I'll tell you, it was Nordstrom's, and it had been, and there was an escalated problem, an escalated client services problem, and it came to my attention, and so I went to address it and see what was going on, and it was a complaint that hadn't been answered in a high-profile client for 3 days. And so I was inquiring, and I was fairly new there. I didn't know all the rules, you see, or the lay of the land, and I said, could someone just tell me, and I'll be happy to help you figure it out if you'll tell me why this complaint hasn't been addressed for 3 days. And they said, well, Lynn Hazel's been sick. I said, excuse me? And they said, Lynn Hazel's been sick, and she's the only one that is allowed to handle Nordstrom's, and we wouldn't dare talk to them before she came back. Now, I can tell you that the people at Nordstrom's were not particularly impressed that out of this large organization that there was only one person that could address their problems. She was. And it really was that turf holding, that it was the whole organization and that piece of knowledge hoarding. There's never knowledge hoarding in universities, is there? I didn't think so. We can go right on from that one. Performers because they don't think well of themselves. You may think that they think well of themselves. They don't. And in order to lift their own performance and the way that they're viewed, they target others. And they point out others. Anybody ever been around anyone like that? Ever been around someone who's never done anything wrong in their life, but everybody else around them has? Not me, boy, right? How about you? You want to tell a story?
Yeah, my old assistant was very much so that way, would bring down all the other departments to try and raise herself and her work up. So it, it really kind of puts you in a compromised position because you're constantly having to defend and promote all the other departments. So it's tough.
Yeah. No one's ever seen rivalry between departments, have you? We would be okay except for those people in accounting. And the people in accounting, we would be okay and we wouldn't be in this difficulty if those people over there were not spending money like water. True? And in corporations, it'll be those salespeople, and Rich could tell you, those salespeople are driving us nuts. They always want something and we can't get our real work done. How do you think you get this work? Yeah? And it really does, that intimidation comes in there too. Manipulators. No one, how many, I'm sure this is, let's talk about an academic piece again. How many people have ever been around a manipulator or currently around a manipulator? Now, certainly, since you get to be in charge right now, and you get to sit in the big girl's chair, you never see people like this, do you? I didn't think so. They've never come to you out of self-interest, do they? No one vindictive? Anyone ever have someone that was vindictive? Back here. Can we get the mic back here? We got a good story I can tell. Even though she's at a back table, she made sure her hand was showing. Isn't this therapeutic?
Yes, I've worked for someone who's very vindictive, and it makes it difficult because I can't do my job worrying about whether or not something's going to happen to me later.
Right.
So it makes it a problem.
That retaliation, you know, self-preservation is a strong urge, isn't it?
Yes.
And certainly not one that we can necessarily ignore. I think that there are many times, Ron, you don't think that there's ever anyone that avoids coming to human resources because someone might retaliate, do you? Ever? No, I didn't think so. It's wonderful to work in a university, isn't it?
How do you change that mindset where you have the manager that's a bully and the entire staff feels it, the entire staff knows it, you go to HR and guess what? Now everybody's a target, as you said. How do you change how you deal with, or how HR or upper management deals with that person to affect change?
You have to have help with this. You can't do this yourself, and particularly with the retaliation. And many, many times, too, the person who actually is doing the bullying, and when you talk to the person who's doing the bullying, they say, I'm not really like that at all. And in many cases, most people don't get up in the morning wanting to be evil. There are a few, I think, probably, but most people don't. And they'll say, I'm not really like that. I don't mean it that way. But in the end, what has to be pointed out to them, that perception is reality. And generally, it takes a complaint, and it takes more than one complaint, and to get someone to do something about that. And we'll talk, too, in just a few minutes about things that need to happen in organizations. No one should have to be afraid. And people are. Worked with a woman, and it did end up that, and she had been allowed to do what she had been doing for almost 20 years. She had a very important function in a professional association. And the people that worked for her, it finally became severe enough that she was told that she had to have a coach, and there was going to be a limited amount of time for this to change, and that it did have to change, or even after all these years, she was going to have to leave. And the people that were in senior leadership and in human resources thought that the women on her team would finally feel relieved and thrilled that she'd been told this. Do you think they were? No. I had to go out to the suburbs of Chicago to meet with the team of women that were working for her and assure them what was going to happen and they would be protected, because they were frightened. They were so frightened that this was going to happen. So it really just, it's pervasive. And the other thing I think that's really hard is if you're not in that group that's being bullied and you're not one of the targets, people from the outside tend to say it can't be that bad, right? That it can be, yeah. Anybody ever, yeah.
You know, one form of bullying, it's maybe more prevalent in higher education and universities, is reverse bullying, where the faculty actually bullying administration. Because of the tenure process and the tenure, they tend to, and I cannot talk about the case because of confidentiality, but this is another form that I really think it's more in higher education. That faculty bullying administrator, whether a department chair, dean, or provost, and sometimes presidents.
Yeah, you have too, that divide certainly, and in the academic community with the division between administration and faculty. Your president's never seen that either, I'm sure, or how it will be. Universities where, and I don't know what it is at Wayne State or here, that there are separate human resource functions that deal with administration from faculty.
Yes.
And I don't know what you do, whether you get together for a title fight once a year, or how that works. But it is, yeah, and great debate, of course, with tenure issues. I think possibly one of the worst honors in a university might be to be asked to serve on the tenure committee. Maybe the most dangerous. No one has ever had someone else take credit for their work, have they? Right here. Yeah.
Well, I didn't think I would have to talk about it, but
I warned you. I warned you.
but you know, I am a business analyst for the company that I work for, and what happens sometimes, even in this role, in my former role, because you do so much in the background, and you work with key people, and you get things together, and then all of a sudden at the end, you have all of your hard work, the credit is given to someone else, and you're like, wait a minute, how how did you forget about me? Until someone says, well, don't forget about Ariane. But from time to time, it happens all the time, and sometimes you don't want to rock the boat and be looked at like you're upset that the credit has been given to someone else. But it's disappointing.
Have you ever thought about that as being bullied?
It is.
Yeah.
It is, because also sometimes I feel, and now that we're talking about diversity, sometimes I feel that they give, how can I say this? They give the non-ethnic person the recognition, when the ethnic people did all the work. So I get that a lot. Have gotten that a lot in the past. So
I always think it's a telling sign if somebody is talking about something and they've really accomplished, and they say, and I need to thank, in one of my least favorite phrases, my people, too, for their help with this, which tells me who did the work, and that we're my people. And you see a number of these behaviors, and once again, do you see how we've learned to accept this in organizational culture, and these things as simply unpleasant, rather than really calling them what they are, and that it really is bullying behavior. Lack of accountability. Everybody's accountable for everything that they do in both universities here, in all these organizations. True? And it really is, it's almost like, when you're learning those things that they should have mother's school for, and I didn't get to go to mother's school, and how it was going to be that there's always one child that never does anything, has never done anything wrong. We all have one of those, I think. I think it comes in the mix, unless you have an only child. But that total lack of accountability. And that lack of accountability can also be not just for making mistakes, but I didn't mean it that way. We say that when we're talking about good leaders and developing leaders, that there's no such thing as a good leader that doesn't have followers. And an important piece that we do in leadership development is followership measurement. I have a really good coach that was talking with the CEO that she was working with, and she said, how do you see yourself? And he said, very proudly, I see myself as a general. And Judy said, well, there's one problem with this general, you don't have any troops. And so it's true that good leaders need followers. But the other problem is bullies need followers also, don't they? can't be a bully by yourself. And so there are certainly people that become and are followers of bullies through their own choice or through being chosen. And there are people, I could tell, you know, the people that were so afraid in the group of the woman that was being coached, I could tell why they had been chosen by her or why they were staying there. And these are some of the people, and you'll recognize if you think about bullies you know or you've known, or situations that you've been in and you've seen around you, that really foster and help bullies grow the same as if they were in a petri dish in a lab. And that's the good person. And unfortunately, and I hate to use the term, but it often is the good girls. And they've been raised to be that way. Good book out for women, particularly young women, called Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a conqueror necessarily, but it means that what gets you ahead at the beginning of your career is being a good, nice girl to do it, and being forgiven, and will overlook that aggression and will go on even after it happens over and over and over. They're more likely. Rich knows someone, and I know someone that's a bully, and the bully did, it's worked out now. He knows that he had to change his behavior. Does the bully need to necessarily believe that he was wrong to change his behavior? No. What you want is that change in behavior so that everybody can thrive and go on. And in this case, this bully was an attorney. Can you believe this was another attorney? And he'd been an attorney in an energy company and a lobbyist for many, many, many years. And it was unbelievable that his assistant, one of his administrative assistants, and had worked for him for a while, said, well, I finally had it. And as they say in the South, she said, he's plucked my last nerve, and I'm done now. And he had an apartment that was in the capital city where he would go to do work. She said, I've put up with a lot over the years, but when he told me I had to scrub the floor on my hands and knees, I just couldn't take it anymore. Unbelievable, wouldn't you think, that this had gone on? But it had. It had. I don't know if George believes to this day that he was wrong, but George had to change his behavior. Seen bullies and where they've changed their behavior, and the people that have sponsored the coaching say, well, Art is much better and things are fine and Art's team is much better now, but I think he's playing a game. I don't think he really believes it. And the answer to that is, does it matter? We're not talking a matter of religious faith. We're talking about behaving properly and about changing behavior and about treating people well and allowing everybody to thrive. Naive, self-sacrificing, and a sense of duty, that's probably, we see that some, not as often, but there are people that do. If I just keep on, surely I can make things better. Non-confrontational, quiet, and non-expressive, that's exactly what a bully looks for and wants. The person that they can cause to be the most, my goodness. I never talk with my hands. That causes the most fear with that. Any of you love confrontation? No. None of us do under the best of circumstances. And in the case of a bully, or where you feel that you might be embarrassed publicly, or there might be retaliation, it's going to be self-critical, accepts the premise that the bully has superior intellect and abilities, and more willing to accept the blame. If we have doubts about ourselves, if we're perfectionists, if we can never be enough. You know, the worst thing in the world is a conversation that starts out, I'm only telling you this for your own good. Have you ever had a good conversation that started out with someone saying that to you? And that's also another bullying tactic. I'm only trying to help her. I really want to see her get ahead. And that's a defense many, many times of a bully. And if you accept that, and I'll try harder. And have any of you ever seen the Keeping Up Appearances show on BBC? And there's a very dominant woman there with a neighbor who can't drink a cup of tea in her house because over the years it's become self-fulfilling that she'll break the china. And so that's easy to do. And vulnerable. And when we're talking about vulnerable, and we've really talked about that with job security, right? We're all vulnerable if we're reporting to a bully. Because if you complain, as you said back there, who generally ends up with the problem? So the followers. So if you begin to feel that you're being bullied, look to if you're becoming a follower of that bully, if you're opening yourself up to that. And that's not to say that you're to blame. You're not. Oh, this is great. I want to come to work here. And it's not always verbal. It's not always verbal. It can just be, like I said, size, expressions, or impossible deadlines. Impossible deadlines are really a way of bullying, too, and doing that. And it also can be, we're seeing that now more and more and more. How many of you feel like you're electronically on close to 24/7? Yeah. And that gets perpetuated, doesn't it? And it can get perpetuated more and can be really bullying behavior. And it really builds and builds and builds and builds. That if Rich is sending me an email at 2 o'clock in the morning, I better answer, because I'm not going to be the only one on the team that doesn't answer, because the next day, in particular this bullying behavior, I'm going to go in and say, you know, I heard from everybody on the team about that problem last night, except you, Susie. Right? You do. Have someone that I work with that her husband finally was invoking the BlackBerry rule, and on the weekends, during the day on Saturday and Sunday, Saturday evening and Sunday during the day, he locks her BlackBerry in his car in the garage. That's happened? Yeah. That can really, I think we can become victims of electronic intimidation. I have someone that's beginning in a new promotion, a new career, whatever, and her idea is that if one email or text to someone is good, 15 might be better. And if she doesn't receive a response within 5 minutes, perhaps she better text or email someone else. And so talking with her and her coach, trying to work with her about how this is certainly not endearing her to anyone or getting her ahead, and she said, and she works in sales, and not in something like critical operating room supplies. And she said, what if I have, as you call it, a red light emergency? And I said, can you give me an example in your job now, what would be a red light emergency? Do you think she had an immediate answer? There was no answer. And most of us, if we think, and that really is that self-important and can be bullying behavior too, that surely everything must be a red light emergency and must be addressed immediately. And that too, and let's think about it, is also bullying behavior. The two-headed snake. You remember the picture of the two-headed snake in the beginning? Pretends to be nice to you while sabotaging you. Anybody ever been around something like that? I had to learn one of the lessons when I had to live in the South for a while about people felt they could say anything to you as long as they said bless her heart afterwards. And then if somebody called you a dear soul, it wasn't a good thing. That it was a very bad thing. And it really is, like I said, if any of you remember the nursery rhyme, there was a little girl that had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead, and when she was good, she was very, very good, and when she was bad, she was horrid. And one of the things about bullying, one of the things about any kind of abuse, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, or whatever, and the reason that it often goes on and people, quote, get away with it for so long, is that when they're good, they're very, very good, and when they're bad, they're horrid. And the good times belie the bad. And often after a very, very, very bad time, then the person who has bullied you does something which appears to be very, very nice or very, very good, and so you think things are better, and you wait. And you're around, and do they ever get better? Is that person always continue to be good if they've had that pattern of behavior? Anybody ever know anyone like that? Ever see anything like that? That it really is a snake. That it really isn't just a personality quirk. The other thing, too, is that abuse never, unless it's addressed, gets better. It always escalates. It always escalates. Don't fool yourself. And you don't have power that's so different from anyone else that that's going to be different in your case. Any of you that have ever been, and I know that none of you are now, any of you ever been in a bad job situation in your life that once you realized it was bad and it might not be a good fit and you might be in the wrong place, that after you came to that conclusion, things got better? Did it ever get better? No. The gatekeeper. It's a bad feeling when you start going by offices or rooms and you know that people are having meetings and you're not invited. Does that give you a bad feeling about what's going on with you? Or what's going to happen to you? And that really also, excluding people and making that kind of fear come to keep them on edge is also a form of bullying. It really is. The screaming Mimi. And it can be also a screaming Matthew. Somehow it seems to be, that's once again a differentiation, like a man is assertive and a woman is aggressive. That can be seen. That the screaming or the outbursts of that. Anyone ever work for a screamer? Or around a screamer? Was that a hand? Did you work for? Okay, they're going to be completely gone here in 15 minutes. Yeah. How did you deal with that?
It was interesting because it was an office of very competent, powerful, it was an office of very competent attorneys and legal paraprofessionals, legal secretaries, and the head of the firm was just a narcissistic tyrant who had no sense of boundaries and really did not respect other people's feelings, thoughts, ideas, and there was one way or, the highway, but everybody went, because they wanted to be there for one reason or another. It wasn't confronted, and it just makes me realize that the issue of boundaries ties in, and books that I've been reading lately about boundaries and setting boundaries in life, and how one has to be willing to confront when boundary violations occur. But in a workplace, because you're scared of consequences, it can be harder to do that, to do the confrontations that you would find hard even in a personal setting, but are so amplified in a work environment where your security is tied to it. But
Worked with an organization that I'd like to write a book about one day. I have a lot of books that I want to write one day. TV series, they could come in and film. We wouldn't even have to have actors. They could just go in. The ratings for The Office would be nothing compared to what they are. Would be if you went in and filmed in many, many workplaces. And it would be called, and I'm thinking about a particular organization, it would be called Everybody Has to Have a Filter But the CEO. Anybody ever seen anyone like that? You see that a lot of times in private companies. Worked in an organization that was a private company, and one of the sayings was always, as long as my name is on that door, I'll do or say what I want. Yeah. And here are some more, here are the consequences, and when we talk about what really happens to people and what happens to the workplace, are you lose valued employees. People finally get over or get past the place, and if they can figure it out financially at all and do it, that they leave. They leave. You lose some of your best people, and you don't know why. Have you ever been around where someone like that, and they'll say, I can't believe that Lars left. He was brilliant. He was wonderful. And they're gone. Morale and motivation. Is there any morale and motivation around working for a bully? Boy, are we glad to come in here today. No, there's usually whispering about how can we protect ourselves and do that. Loss of productivity, everybody shuts down. They're afraid to do things. They don't want to be the target, and it's often better to do nothing than to worry about doing something wrong. Stress-related illness. Any of you ever feel like when if I have to go in there one more time, I may throw up? Yeah. Increased litigation for a hostile work environment. And so that is one way in the same sex now, and because we don't have the anti-bullying legislation, that it now is being addressed often through hostile work environment. And with that, but it's also nasty going through those sort of things. Retaliatory responses in the worst cases. Violence in the workplace is still a very real thing. It's not just the post office, folks. And it really is a scary, scary and dangerous thing. And in cases of idea, knowledge workers, and not just manufacturing, can be sabotage, or sabotage when it goes. So how are we going to get rid of it? Real fast. The policy has to be set from the top. You know, when you said, what can I do about it? How can I complain? What can I do? The policy must start from the top. Same way with change. Any change effort must start from the top of the organization and then filter down and become the culture. Bullies must be confronted, and that has to be supported from the top. As long as it goes on, it's going to go on. They have no reason to change. It's worked for them. There has to be a formal anti-bullying policy. It has to be written, it has to be shared, it has to be important. It's not just something on paper, and it's made clear to everybody in the organization and everybody coming in. Good for you in doing your climate survey when you did. But we don't just do one climate survey. It has to be done periodically and make sure things are going, particularly if there's been bullying incidents or that's been reported. As that person is exited from the organization or those issues are addressed, you need to keep up with finding out what's really going on. And is that change being anchored? Change isn't change until it becomes the only way that we deal with things around here. There have to be clear processes that people can use and that people know what to do and how to do them and that they can do them safely. And most important in that policy, and it has to be enforced and meant, is that there are no retaliation guarantees for everybody in an organization. And those guarantees are there for everyone, from the president down. Everyone is protected against retaliation. And educating all employees about bullying and what their rights are and what their responsibilities are about their behavior has to become the cornerstone of culture and inclusion and diversity and hiring policies in every business and organization to stop the epidemic. And it is an epidemic, and it's got to be an all-out war against bullying in the workplace and the protection of everyone. I don't feel strongly about this. I can't feel strongly enough about this. We have to protect everybody. Any questions? I don't have all the answers, but I bet somebody might in the room. Question?
I'm just walking up to the top so I can hand out her gift. But anybody have any questions over here?
I grew up in the Caribbean, so I have the British influence. And in high school, I remember after we have a speaker come, they'll ask someone to give a vote of thanks. I want to give a vote of thanks to you today, because what you have said to us, I don't think you have left any stones unturned, that we cannot come up with a good question when we are faced with a bully. Because sometimes it is important to know what to say, to let bring that person into a checkpoint. Because just as you have said, maybe we have been trained that way, but we need to rechange the way we have been doing it. So I want to just commend you for coming here at least. If you have not reached the borders of the Metro Detroit, you have reached us, and we can make that difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The question is, you were talking about CEOs and bosses at private companies, and you were saying that bullying must be stopped from the top. So it seems like we have a bit of a paradox there.
It's always interesting when it's nearly 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon in Chicago and my phone rings and it's not one of my children or one of my friends, and it's an attorney, or it's someone from a I keep picking on him, he's a great attorney. It's an attorney or it's someone from a board of directors. And so there really are people past the CEO that it will often get addressed that way. Probably one of our worst bullies, and his nickname in his organization was the Wrench. And the Wrench was being charged for sexual harassment by both a man and a woman. And that's why the call came at nearly 5 o'clock. Aren't you glad you weren't involved in that? That it either has to be addressed from beyond that with the CEO, or if you are working in an organization like that, it is a toxic workplace, and you must make the choice whether you will stay there. I made that choice, like I said, I worked in Big Pharma, and Big Pharma for years has been like the old game Pac-Man with mergers and acquisitions and changes, and I was fine through a number of them until I finally got to the place that I didn't want to be fine or think that I wanted people like that to like me. And the president of our new merger, we were in a meeting, a senior leadership meeting, and the executive VP of sales, who had been there and very successful for about 10 years, was leading the meeting. And the person who was the new CEO said, "Mike, could I see you outside?" And 5 minutes later, our new CEO came back in and said, "Mike is no longer with this organization. Get used to it." I knew I had to leave. So sometimes, but it does need to start at the top or as high up as it can. Anyone else?
I have a question. It seems very insidious that we can all sit in a room and agree that bullying is awful and we need to do something, and then to actually look at our own environments or how we are in our environments, that there's often a cohesive culture that tolerates a certain level of bullying, so that if you have a victim speaking up, there's a lot of kind of people close ranks and then victim blame. I'm wondering if you could speak to how you've dealt with that, or what advice you would have for dealing with that, how we start talking about it.
Yeah, and that you do that, and like you said, the victims close rank around you because of their own fears of that person. Is that what you're talking about? And then you're sort of out in the wilderness, alone with that. That's a real problem. That's a real problem, and at that point, you have to decide if the person that you're talking to, filing the complaint with, or addressing it is going to do that, or if you need to look elsewhere in that organization, or if you need to look elsewhere. That's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to say. It's a tough thing to do. And it also has to do with your own, not only physical health or mental health, but it also has to do with your career success, because you are not, I'm sorry, you're not going to succeed. Your career is not going to move ahead.
Hi, are there any women empowerment groups, state or national, that you could recommend, or website addresses?
There are a lot, and I don't know, there must be, and I'm sure around Detroit, because they're everywhere now, and I found very helpful, no matter how much you like her writing, and there's some of it I like, some of it I don't. Lean In community groups. Sheryl Sandberg, after her book was published. And if you belong to LinkedIn, or you can sign up LinkedIn for free, there are numerous lean in groups. And it's often good to be with women outside your own organization too. The one thing I'll say with Cheryl's latest campaign, and God knows she's more powerful and more wealthy than I am, but I'm a little older and have some experience. And I think there are many good things about her campaign to eradicate the word bossy and bossy girl, but just eradicating the word bossy girl is not going to do it. Being bossy is not the problem. Being a bully is the problem. But those groups are very good, and you'll meet women that there's no other way that you would get to meet them. You might want to look at too, and I'm sure when they talk about microaggression later, microaggression.com, people post on there and comment examples of aggression and things that do fold over into abuse and bullying on the website, and there are all sorts of examples of that and comments. Good site. How you feel about people and the way you look at things, and difference and diversity and dealing with people. I'm an old child of the 60s. I just wear better clothes now. And one of my favorite organizations is Southern Poverty Law Center, if you're familiar with that at all. They not only have good material on there, they have excellent self-assessments you can take about your attitudes and the way you deal with people and look at people. And I'm also, I have cards too, and I'll be glad to hook you up with people. I obviously like to talk about what I do and hook you up with other people that would like to talk about it, or if you'd like to talk about things in your organization about coaching, I'm always open. I love to come to Detroit. That's how I got to know Ron. Everybody in Chicago thinks that's kind of strange. He'll say, you have to go to Detroit again? And I'll say, oh, I like to go. So I'll be glad to come back anytime. I'd be glad to have conversations with all of you.
I just want to say one thing. We're all talking about concerns about standing up, and I've been doing a lot of that lately, and I just want to say I find it quite liberating. I find there's a peace of mind when you stand up and when you are well thought out and you state your case in a calm, thorough way. I find the more you do it, the better you get, and the better you get, the more you do. And so I would just urge everybody that, I've stood up for a few things that were pretty dicey, and I'm alive and well to tell about it. I'm here today, so I want to share that.
Anyone else? Rich?
For me, this has been a great opportunity to listen to everybody's story. But after one of these discussions, I always have these two words come in my mind: so what? So what are we going to do? And as part of what you're saying, so what are we going to do different? Because I grew up in an environment that says, you know, change starts with the person in the mirror. So I think we have to all look in the mirror ourselves and say, what are we going to do different to stamp this out? And if you're a leader, the one thing that I think a lot of us as leaders forget is that people know who the bullies are in the organization. They'll go, oh, that's just George, that's the way he is, or that's just Sue. And as leaders, by not addressing that, we're demeaning ourselves and taking away our own ability to lead the organization. So I think the key is for us to write down maybe a couple things of, so what are we going to do differently when we go back in the environment? Because right now we'll move on to the next topic, and we'll think about the next topic and forget about the one we spent the last hour and 15 minutes talking about. So thank you.